Andrew Boff and Nigel Farage have a little bit of a clash on GB News. And the reason I wanted to comment on this video is because it's kind of another one where we can see Nigel Farage at his best, i.e. worst. When he's at his best, he is at his worst, in my opinion. But you know what I mean. So, this is a classic case of his sensationalism and his kind of whitewashing of just, people talking sense, or his whitewashing of truth and facts. So this conversation is about if the UK should leave the ECHR, which is the European Commission for Human Rights. Now, just off the bat, anybody who wants to leave a human rights kind of setup has to ring massive alarm bells, especially when the UK does it after Brexit and its decline into horrific right racism. And also considering how our government is currently trying to massively inhibit protests. So you can see how the government is currently really hammering down on rights of the population, of the people, and how it's becoming this weirdly kind of dystopian-y governmental heavy kind of country. Anyway, let's listen to what they have to say.
Deputy Chair of the London Assembly, Andrew Boff, long-time member of that august institution, joins me in this studio. Andrew, leaving the European Union was a terribly difficult issue for the Conservative Party to get to grips with. An argument, it took a very long time for the party to come to terms with the fact the party had voted to leave. This issue of ECHR is even more difficult, isn't it?
I don't think so, because it's not the same thing, as you pointed out. The ECHR has got nothing to do with the EU at all.
Well, it does actually, indirectly.
No.
Well, I could, as an MEP,
yeah.
I could walk from the European Parliament straight into the European Court of Human Rights through a corridor.
Yeah, that's because our restaurant was better in the Strasbourg.
Well, that may be arguable.
But no, there's no link between them apart from the fact that they're in the same city.
Well, the link's very clear. You can't be an EU member without being an ECHR member.
The chances. You can't be an EU member.
You cannot be an EU member
but
without being a signatory.
Leavers like ourselves were looking forward to a time when we could leave the EU and fully take up our international responsibilities, fully take up our sovereignty with regards to how we trade and who we deal with in the world, and that's been the Brexit benefit.
I don't want to do the usual kind of YouTube commentator laughing all the time like an idiot, but it is just fucking ridiculously funny when somebody says the benefits of leaving, the benefits of Brexit, which up to this point and looking into the future, there are none. Zero. Nothing. There is not one benefit so far for anybody except the super rich who can offshore their money and the oligarchs who are taking over London. There is no benefit to anybody in this country other than a very, very, very small selected few. And funny enough, if you look at those few, they're the ones who also wanted Brexit because they didn't want to pay taxes. And the reason I say that is because it was pretty clear that the EU was going to clamp down on tax evasion and all these kind of offshoring and all this kind of stuff. And that is, funny enough, exactly at that point when certain politicians were like, oh, we need to leave the EU so we have control over our own borders. And the irony of this whole thing is that the only thing that Brexit closed down from anybody who's a racist bastard and he doesn't want anybody in the country anymore is they were mainly concerned about colored people, right? People from the Middle East or Africa or some of the Eastern European countries. who according to them just came here and used up all our stuff and never gained it, never brought anything, or were criminals or whatever. That was their reasoning. And Brexit hasn't stopped any of that. Brexit only stopped the educated Europeans who contributed to the economy to not come. That's all. All the other problems still exist, according to you. So I personally don't have an issue with anybody coming here, but I'm talking about the reason why people wanted to have control of their borders didn't really work out, because the problems, the kind of people that they have a problem with coming over the border still come, and Brexit hasn't even remotely kind of sorted that problem. But this is about the European Convention on Human Rights and how Britain wants to leave it. And just the fact that they want to leave a convention of human rights should just ring so many alarm bells. Why would you need to? Why would you want to? Anyway, let's carry on.
ECHR is a completely different body. It was, as you so rightly said, it was forged in the wreckage of a Europe ripped apart by a war, and they put that court together because small as they started off as, and in the end that ended up as being people herded onto cattle trucks to concentration camps. And I'm very aware of Godwin's law, but this actually is what it's about.
You and I totally understand where this court comes from, and I understand why it was set up, and I get why Churchill and British lawyers were behind doing it. I get all of that. But with respect to that argument, that was 75 years ago. We are now living in a very different world. You yourself talked about...
we aren't, are we, Nigel? We aren't living in a different world. We're still getting situations, we've still had horrible situations in Europe where the equivalent of Holocaust have been taken place, or the equivalent of ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, in the ex-Yugoslavia. These all happened.
30 years ago. Yeah, 30 years ago, those horrible things did happen.
The ones,
I find it weird that he's trying to make out, just because something happened long ago, that the reasons for making decisions after that don't apply anymore, as if people change or governments change, or the reasons for bad things happening, especially like dictators or kind of Holocaust kind of things. The reasons that happen is because people are fucking dickheads. And you put the wrong person in charge and it's all fucked. Just like we have now. We put the Tories in charge and we're fucked. So this idea that, something happened in the past and, we created something in the past that therefore, it's not relevant anymore is pretty crazy. Especially what I find hilarious is that the British definitely don't have a good track record of human rights. I mean, we're talking about 500 years odd of colonialism and interference with other states, mass murder, I mean, you name it, retracing borders, dividing people. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just fucking look it up, okay? Because I'm not going to go into it. Anyway.
History is, if you don't learn from history, if you say it'll never happen again because it was in the past, then you're instantly condemning yourself to recreate those problems.
Hang on. You said yourself a moment ago that the point about Brexit was to get benefits, right? And you know as well as I do, one of the main reasons for Brexit was getting back control of our borders. Now, when an elected government with an 80-seat majority proposes sending people to Rwanda, and an unnamed judge, probably without legal training in Strasbourg at 10 p.m. at night, stops that flight going. That is not the sovereignty.
It's unlikely that without legal training. That is not the sovereignty you and I voted for. That's unlikely. It's not without legal training. You know that the judges in the European Court for Human Rights are qualified judges. Not so much in the European Court of Justice, which we now can say goodbye to.
Many of the ECHR judges are jurists, not judges. But that's a technical point. Yeah. I want to do the big picture with you. Yeah. The big picture is, we voted Brexit. You were a Brexiteer. Mm-hmm. The Conservative Party, in the end, got it, won a big majority of it. If we cannot control our borders, because judges in the ECHR...
Absolutely, we should control our borders, and we need to put in laws
How
that
can we do that?
Well, we can put in place laws that do that. And if you cite that example of that particular person who was told that they couldn't go to Rwanda, that wasn't because they said the policy was wrong. It was because that person hadn't had the rights for a legal process, for a legal process that's been established in this British...
Why should anybody...
Established in our British Constitution since Magna Carta.
Why should
we abandon that?
Why should anybody that crosses the Channel by dinghy illegally have any legal rights?
Well, one of the things...
See, that's the kind of comment that it's at that point where the colors are really showed, where, like, why should anybody have legal rights? We don't know who comes over. And sure, there might be some bad apples. Nobody's disputing that. But actually, the bad apples are most likely in the massive minority. The majority of the people that come over are people who really need to get out from wherever they are, and they need help. Who are we if we don't offer help? Who are we if we treat them like dogs without any legal representation or any legal rights? What kind of people are we? How can we keep our head up if we treat people like that? Anybody like that?
Well, first of all, genuine asylum seekers have a right to come in.
We let in huge numbers of asylum seekers in the last 2 years.
Less.
We've let them in from Ukraine. We've let them in from...
virtually any other country in Europe.
No. We've allowed them in from Hong Kong, from Ukraine, Afghanistan.
These were all decisions of the United Kingdom government. And, as I remember, that had a considerable support amongst the British people, because they...
So there we are. Firstly, it is true. Britain takes in far less immigrants. What they did do when during Afghanistan and times like that is that they took in a lot less than other countries in Europe. But what they did do, apparently, from what I remember, is that they paid a lot of money towards certain countries for that disparity that they didn't take. So they did assist. They also assisted, apparently, as far as I know, financially with getting people out of some of those war-torn countries. So, anyway.
They didn't want people who had been supportive of us to be effectively told you're going to have to languish under a regime that's going to...
What they don't want are unnamed young men who throw their passports into the English Channel, who could come from any background.
There are a load of legal redresses to this. The only time...
Name one.
Well, there are a load of things that the government can do to make sure that those borders are the best controlled in Europe. But they rather than choosing to do that, rather than do the difficult job of making sure we have legislation in place that can do that, what they do is they cry foul, blame someone else. And European Convention on Human Rights. There is an absolute right under the European Convention for countries to determine who and who should not be in their country. But it has to have a legislative
when somebody
framework.
comes before a judge in this country, they claim Article 8 of the ECHR of a right to a family life, but deportation doesn't.
They don't. That's a small minority. And if you actually look at the number of cases that have gone to Strasbourg, of the 250 that were sent last year, vast majority of those were ruled out of order. Only 4 went to legal redress, and 2 of those were thrown out.
So why are we not?
So I wanted to quickly stop here because I think this is part of the issue when it comes to racists, is that they get an overblown view of the actual problem. You know, making out as if everybody runs to the ECHR and then, you know, through that claims asylum and is successful. And as is quite clearly just repeated, is that, look, the numbers are pathetically tiny. And I think the same probably goes for the problems that immigration brings in, just like during the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, everything, you know, austerity was essentially blamed on poor people and benefit frauds, which cost the government and the taxpayer like a tiny amount compared to corruption, tax avoidance from big corporations, and the fact that the banks themselves were basically entirely to blame for them all failing, and then taxpayers having to bail them out with taxpayer money, which was massive loans against pension funds, etc., etc., etc. So there's always this exaggeration, which I feel like a lot of people who have like a really heavy-handed stance against things like immigration is because they get the wrong message, and that message is not sometimes wrong, but more importantly, it's usually massively exaggerated.
Deporting more people.
Because the problem we've got is that the processing, the government has recognised that the processing of people as they come into this country needs to be improved. And it's been underfunded.
Well, the processing, frankly...
They know that that's the case.
Virtually every person who claims to be Afghan is now being allowed to stay. That's how the process is. But
that's not the...
Let's say that's true. Afghanistan is an absolute shithole now. It is completely ravaged by war for nearly 2 decades now, and you can argue that a lot of the problems, a lot of the reasons Afghanistan is a war-torn country is actually through US and UK interference and manipulation for the last God knows how many decades. They play a huge part in why that country is war-torn in the first place. You know, they all divide and conquer, pitting one against the other, creating all these militant factions. So Britain and the US has a massive duty to look after the people that they have essentially broken their country, or at least were played a massive part in the country being in the state that it's in. So... And the fact that they created this war and then just left, and now the people just have to suffer. So if somebody comes here and says, "Look, man, I need to feed my kids," or "I'm being, I fear for my life if I keep living there," that is a legitimate asylum seeker's request.
Case.
But let's move on.
That's not the case.
Let's move on. You and I,
large number,
Andrew.
No, I'm not letting you get away with that, Nigel.
True.
No, it's not.
They're on TikTok every day.
Because in the large...
this was actually the thing that triggered me into making this video. Like, he bases his reality on what he sees on TikTok. Listen.
But let's move on. That's not the case.
Let's move on. You and I,
large number,
Andrew.
No, I'm not letting you get away with that, Nigel.
True.
No, it's not.
They're on TikTok every day.
Because
they're on TikTok every day. There you go. That is your truth right there. They're on TikTok every day.
In the large quantity of those cases, those people are told they can't be in this country. They have no...
To be fair, right? Any kind of high-paid journalist who refers to TikTok or as some source of legitimate data, it's like, wow, that kind of shows you the quality of GBN news. Yeah, anyway.
No valid claim for asylum.
And then they're not deporting.
And then they were deporting them. The fact that they're not being deported...
Not deporting them.
The fact that they're not deporting them is an administrative problem. It's not a legal one. And the ECHR would...
The ECHR, in my view, was a part of that. But, return to the point. When Rishi Sunak says the Conservative Party could put in its next manifesto leaving the ECHR, you'd be root and branch opposed to that.
Absolutely 100%. I do not want to join a club that only Belarus and Russia are currently members of.
OK. Andrew Boff. Thank you very much.
I despair.